Good morning. I'm very happy to be here. As you can see, the title of the talk is Cognitive Forensics Expertise, the Biasing Snowball Effect, and Context Management. Very long title. I have a lot to talk about. So I left my email if people want to continue the discussion later, as well as my webpage where I put a lot of the information and details. I'm very happy to be here, and especially happy to give a plenary presentation because it shows that the organizers of the conference recognize the important and critical role cognition has in forensic science and that it cuts across many domains. Some of the things I'm going to say may not be very popular. You may disagree, and that's fine. All I ask is that you listen and consider them and think about it. When I started to work in the area of forensics about a decade ago and started to talk about cognition and bias, then there was quite a harsh, quite a resistance, sometimes very personal and defensive, but things have gotten much better in the last 5–10 years, which is quite remarkable. And I'm talking about the change globally. The United States, United Kingdom, Australia, Israel, things have really changed, but there is still a bit of misunderstanding of what we mean by bias, by cognitive forensics, and I'm going to try to talk about that today. So what is the big fuss about? Why was there such a resistance? Because in most forensic areas, as far as I know, I'm not a forensic scientist, there is no exact instrument of quantification. When you look at firearms, document examiner, fingerprint, you don't put it into a machine and they say, yes, it's a match or not. There's a lot of human examiners who make perceptions, they make judgments, they make decisions. In fact, I would go to the extreme of saying that in many, not all, but in many forensic domains, it is the human examiner that is the instrument of analysis. The core of forensic science, many times, it's a human examiner, people like you and other examiners doing their work. Even with EAFS, the automated fingerprint identification system, and a similar system exists in shoe prints and firearms, still, when you're talking about a latent print, the technology, it's a great and wonderful technology. I'm not saying it's not good, but still, it only gives the most likely candidates, and it's a human examiner that still makes the decision is there a match or not a match. Even with statistics, a great scientific tool, still the human needs to determine what goes as input into the statistical equation. So even if you figure out, and hopefully you will figure out, statistical model for every forensic domain, still, for example, in fingerprint, you have to decide if there is a minutia, how many minutia there are, where there are, and put it into the statistical model. So the human element is still there. And I would say that even with objective quantification, that exist in some forensic domains like chemistry, for example, and as the years go by, we'll have more and more objective instrumentation. Still, the human element is not going to disappear. You have a lot of issues of sampling. You have issues of determining if it's a noise or a signal, and so on and so forth. So in forensic, like in medicine, like in the military, like in many domains, technology, instrumentation, science advances, but very, very rarely is the human out of the picture, and the human cognition is not a critical element in the work that is being done. I'm not a forensic examiner, and I don't mean it as an insult or a compliment. I don't care about forensic science per se. Personally, I do as a human being, but as a scientist, I have no interest in forensic science, just like I have no interest in aviation, in medical domain. I'm a cognitive scientist. I'm interested in expertise, in increasing human performance, especially in expert domains. And I work in a variety of expert domains, a lot in the medical domain, military, frontline policing, for example, the decision to use force or not by frontline policing, and forensic also. But I'm a cognitive scientist. My interest, my academic interest, is in expertise across domain. And when we talk about cognition and cognitive architecture, it's really a very fascinating machine that we have here, because people, even not experts, but experts even more, have wonderful abilities, really great, flexible abilities. But also cognitive architecture is not perfect, and there are some inherent weaknesses, some vulnerabilities in the human cognitive system. Subjectivity, contextual influences, and bias. And already here I'm careful, because I've had some interesting experience with the forensic community. When I say bias, I mean cognitive bias. I'm not calling anybody racist and anti-Semitic and whatever. We're talking about cognitive bias, not the word bias that it appears in the street when people think they're being discriminated. We're talking about cognitive bias. And the cognitive bias is not bad. It's a good thing. Smart people have cognitive bias. In fact, there's a lot of literature suggesting, here's an example from a recent paper from 2012 in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, showing that intelligent people are not only susceptible to cognitive bias, they are more susceptible to bias. The more intelligent you are, the more expert you are, the more bias. This is part of the cognitive architecture. And that includes making mistakes from time to time. Errors are not only part of human nature, they're not only part of how the brain works and processes information, but they are a critical tool for learning and improvement. In the medical domain, we cause surgeons to make mistakes in medical simulations, not on real patients. We use sabotage, intentionally tricking them to making a mistake, because when they make a mistake, that's when they really learn. So it's a very important tool. And as I like to say, errors are our friends. They're very helpful to us. And if I may quote Niels Bohr, he's a Danish physicist. He laid the foundation for quantum mechanics. He got a Nobel Prize. He defined an expert as someone who's made every possible mistake. That's what an expert is. Only when you make every mistake once, not again and again, then you become an expert. So what is the big fuss about? Why in the forensic community I've had experiences that I've not had in any other domain that I worked in? Maybe, and it's only a maybe, it's a speculation, because of the adversarial nature of the legal system in many countries. So once you admit you may make a mistake, you have an opposing side, whether you're on the prosecution or the defense, and it's going to be used against you. So maybe because of that, the culture of discussing, yes, I may be wrong, is very different. Maybe generally the notion of expertise, people who are experts are overconfident. Even people who are not experts are overconfident. If I pass out a questionnaire now and ask you, how well do you drive? 75% say they drive above average. If I pass a question and ask you, how intelligent, what do you estimate your IQ? 90% of the population have above average IQ of 110 or 120. With this audience, it may be true. You're not a random sample, and probably 95 or maybe 100% of you are above 100 IQ. But in the general population, most people believe that they are above average, have over 100 IQ, when 100 IQ, if you're familiar with IQ psychometrics, is the average by definition. And this gets much more complicated and much worse with expertise in metacognition. Maybe the lack of cognitive expertise and training. Forensic scientists and examiners, and I talk in many forensic domains in many parts of the world, are great experts in forensic science, but I'll say it in a British way, I've been in England for too long, they're not very knowledgeable about cognition and don't have training and understanding of the cognitive system, so maybe not familiar with the cognitive element has caused this approach. Or maybe, and again, it's a speculation, the cognitive community has not been challenged until the last decade. Until then, forensic evidence has been accepted in court, basically unchallenged, and you got used to just, yes, what you say is right, and nobody likes to be suddenly being challenged. For whatever reason, there was a hostile response. And I didn't know until just a few years ago, I thought I was the first one who talked about bias in forensic science. No, back in the 1980s, Larry Miller published papers on bias in forensic science. Over 30 years ago, there were papers with data about bias in forensic science. They made no impact, except Larry Miller and Reinhold Stoll. Larry Miller and I just submitted the paper. He got hostile response, was dismissed, and has disappeared. But maybe in another 30 years, that would have happened to the work I've done, but there was a few differences. First of all, I did research on fingerprinting, and Larry Miller looked at hair comparison, document examination. And fingerprint is the cornerstone of forensic science. So I collected data on fingerprints. Two, I did in some of my studies a within experiment design. I didn't compare participant A in one context, participant B in a different context, because there's a lot of differences between people. I did a within subject design, which basically means I tested the same person on the same evidence in different contexts and showed that in some cases they may reach different conclusions. And the last thing I didn't, in some of my studies, there were not a laboratory experiment where you come to a forensic laboratory and say, can you participate in my study or in a conference? People were doing casework. They were not aware they're participating in a study, and it was real casework. My first study was not. But the first thing I got, oh, this is a laboratory experiment. In casework, you will get contextual effects. So I did it as casework and found it. These are all internal reasons, perhaps why my research has caused a bit more of a turmoil than what happens over 30 years ago with George Miller. However, there's also external reasons that have got nothing to do with my research. First of all, the Mayfield example, which I assume you're all familiar, and if not, then we'll talk about it another time. But in fingerprint, highly published mistake, and not by a laboratory, but the FBI. The FBI laboratory, let me tell you, extremely motivated people, highly capable, highly trained, highly competent, wonderful lab. You can't say, oh, you know, they're A-class top lab, and they made a mistake, very public. Two, in the United States, the National Academy of Science had a very extensive report on forensic science, and they specifically talked about cognitive interpretation and bias. And the European version, the McKee Inquiry in Scotland, it was on fingerprints, but again, talking about bias and about cognitive issues. And the third external is that the US National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, and NIJ and FBI have taken on this issue and are really looking into it and pushing it forward in the agenda. They establish expert working groups. They fund research looking at best practices on cognitive profile and a variety of issues. So because of a number of internal reasons of the research, but also a lot of circumstances and support from the Research and Standards Institute have really put this topic in the forefront rather than being buried like happened over 30 years ago with George Miller. Now that we accept or are willing to talk about cognitive issues, and understand this pyramid that we're here and talking about improving forensic science. But we can't do it if we don't talk about problems or potential problems and challenge ourselves. Maybe there's no problems. Everything is perfect. I'm willing to entertain that idea if you're willing to entertain the idea that there may be possible potential problems. And if any one of you says there's no problems, and there cannot be, there's no potential problems, then I find it to be a very difficult scientific discourse, maybe a religious discourse, but not a scientific one. So I'm willing to entertain that everything is perfect. If you're willing to entertain that there may be problems, let's look at it, let's collect data and do serious research, acknowledge issues, understand that the instrument in forensic science is a human examiner, and the bottom of the pyramid, where I see it, is psychology, cognitive, and brain research, which is very relevant. But this is very important and relevant to your domain. So we need to start talking about the brain. We don't have too much time, and look at the processing mechanisms in the brain. And what I want to tell you in 1 minute that I have, that what you see and your judgment and the mechanisms of the brain that process information, the blue balls are what you see, what you touch, what you smell, depends a lot on what's in here, not what is out in the real world. The way the brain processes information, the cognitive mechanism determine to a large degree what you see and what you think, and not the information out there. Let's stop with a naive view that we see things objective. I have a paper entitled, Perception is Far from Perfection. Don't be naive. What I see is what's out there. Now, what you see reflects a lot what's in here and how the brain processes information. It's a very efficient, very effective system, the brain, but it's not a passive machine. The human mind is not a camera. That's one of the reasons it's so effective, and it interacts. It takes lots of shortcuts. There's lots of tricks. The brain is not powerful because of brute force. When you look at chess players, when they started to do research, they believed that a novice chess player looks 2 moves ahead. An expert chess player looks 4 moves ahead, and the grandmasters can look 5, 6 moves ahead. No, it's not that the grandmasters have more computational power in their brain and they can brute force look ahead. And the computer programs who play against them have more power to check more moves. It's not a matter of brute force. And I can go and explain to you about the evolutionary forces and limited resources that the brain has. The brain has limited resources. It cannot check everything. And because of that, we developed intelligence. If our brain was very big, we would be quite stupid. The reason we're smart is because the brain is small. It cannot do everything. So we had to start to decide what's important and what's not important because we can't process everything. To prioritize, we need to start planning, and so on and so forth. And this is even more with experts. Now, we know that forensics are experts. You have expertise. There's an excellent, let's look at fingerprinting. There's an excellent paper by Jason Tangent, Matt Thompson, McCartney, identifying fingerprint expertise in psychological science from last year. There's another excellent paper by Brad Ullerly, Austin Hicks, Joanna Buscaglia, and Maria Roberts, Accuracy and Reliability of Forensic Latent Print Decisions from last year, Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. There's great research. Today there's a talk on this. You can hear all the details that show fingerprint are experts. Yes, not only fingerprints, document examiners too. And document examiners is even more important to show that they're experts because as a novice, I have no experience with fingerprints. So experts who look at fingerprints are going to be experts. With documents, normal people, novices, have experience. They've seen handwriting many times before. Maybe when you were in high school, you tried to forge your parents' signature. We've seen it before. We bring something to the table, in contrast to fingerprints. So everyone has some intuition when you show them 2 handwritings, because we have experience. But in document examining, the paper by Kam et al., Signature Authentication by Forensic Documents Examiner, Journal of Forensic Science, Dyer found enlarged with visual attention and expertise for forensic signature analysis. So in document examiners, you have expertise. And in firearms, and in many domains. There was a poster I saw yesterday on facial recognition showing that forensic experts are better than novices. So yes, there are expertise in forensic science, and we know that forensic examiners, when they have experience and training, develop those expertise. And it enables, like experts, to have wonderful performance. That's all nice and good, but that doesn't mean you are perfect. There are no weaknesses in your expertise. There are computational cognitive trade-offs. The cognitive mechanisms in the brain have inherent side effects of what makes an expert an expert. I have a paper, The Paradox of Human Expertise, Why Experts Get It Wrong, in a book, The Paradoxical Brain. And the summary is expertise is correctly but one-sidedly associated with special abilities and enhanced performance. The other side of expertise, however, is superstitiously hidden. Along with expertise, performance may also be degraded, accumulating a lack of flexibility and error. Expertise is demystified by explaining the brain functions and cognitive architecture involved in being an expert. These information processing mechanisms, the very making of expertise, entail computational trade-offs that sometimes result in paradoxical functional degradation. For example, being an expert entails using schemas, selective attention, chunking information, automaticity, and other reliance on top-down information, all of which allow experts to perform quickly and efficiently. However, this very mechanism restricts flexibility and control, may cause experts to miss and ignore important information, introduce tunnel vision and bias, and can cause other effects that degrade performance. Such phenomena are apparent in a wide range of expert domains, from medical professionals and forensic examiners to military fighter pilots and financial traders. And in this paper, it's on the web, I talk about taxi drivers in London who have real great cognitive maps of London and brain scans. However, as they develop expertise in cognitive maps of London, they lose certain memory abilities of others. And again, in the paper, I go into the brain mechanisms and the scans, and if you're interested in the detail. The bottom line is experts, what makes you an expert cognitively, also introduce some weaknesses. I'll give you a few illustrations, a few examples. So this is Fraser spiral, because it looks like a spiral, but in fact, these are perfect parallel circles. If you don't believe me, drop me an email, I'll send you the JPEG, and you can sit on the airplane and follow the lines. Perfect circle. Perfect circle. It's a bunch of perfect circles. Now, if you see it the way it is objectively, and you see it as parallel circles, something is wrong with you. Your brain is functioning correctly if you distort the image. Here's another example. How many Fs do you count? How many Fs you see here? How many Fs do you see? I'm asking.
4.
He sees 4. Are you sure 4?
No.
He's not sure. How many do you see? Hey, he sees 4 too. How many people see 4? How many people see 3? Okay, many people see 3 or 4 or 5. There are 6. First of all, let me show it to you. But I'm kind of worried forensic examiners can't see Fs on the screen, which are big, you know. So first of all, let me show it to you. Everybody, or hopefully, saw 3 Fs, but there are 3 other Fs, of, and of. 3 out 3 is 6. Are you blind? No. You are experts. Experts mean your brain is an optimized, tuned, find machine. So you read a lot, and your brain knows of, the, is, carries no meaning. Why would your brain spend resources when you read? It would take you a week to read a paper if you read every word. Your brain automatically, unconsciously, prioritize this information when you're an expert. And many of you are not native speakers of English. In the British universities, in American universities, bring students. I pay them $1 or £1 for every F they see. Very motivated. You know how many pizza and beers they can buy? And they see 3 or 4. So this is an example how being an expert in reading, automatically the brain filters out information. You don't see it, you interact. Don't feel bad that you saw 3 or 4. You're an expert. Your brain is optimized and knows what to look and not to look at. That is the underlining of expertise, taking shortcuts, focusing on the important information. Also judgments, if you look at football, and we show pictures like this, and you need to decide between A and B. I finish at 9:15 or 9:30? 9:15. OK, I have to move a bit faster. And these two pictures are exactly the same. We just flipped the direction between them. And the brain has a bias. In Western countries, we like movement from left to right. We don't like things from right to left. We'll not get into it. And you give it to professional referees and ask them, is there a foul committed? You find that when the same information is from right to left, they will judge it and interpret this as a foul, versus if it's the way they like, they say it's not a foul. It's not bias, I consciously discriminating. It's a brain. The brain likes certain motions in one way. They always try to come to the podium from this side to get on your good side already. And look at movies. Hollywood producers know that. Good guys will come from this side, bad guys will come from this side. I'm serious. I don't know if they get cognitive training or intuition. So I don't have too much time, but context, knowledge, emotions, framing, state of mind, motivation, expectation, hope, and much more occurs in the human brain as we process, and this can cause self-fulfilling prophecy, wishful thinking, confirmation bias, cognitive dissonance, escalation of commitment, and much more. Confirmation bias has been very popular because the Mayfield case, when they did an investigation, they said confirmation bias. But confirmation bias is only one cognitive issue. There are many, and the list here is not a full list, it's a partial list. The human mind is complex and very relevant to forensic work. How is it relevant for forensic work? I will tell you very quickly because my time is limited. Take, for example, base rate bias. EAFS, Automated Fingerprint Identification System, gives lists of candidates, but almost always when there is a hit across laboratories, the hit is on the top. 95, 98%, it's the top one. 99.5%, it's in the top 2 or 3. I go to a laboratory and say, oh, we had a hit in place 28. When? 3 years ago, out of 4,000 examiners. So that causes, you remember the F's, people who look at EAFS list for the brain to have an expectation that the match, if it's there, it's going to be on the top place or 2. It's not going to be down the list. The same in airport security screening. No bomb, no bomb, no bomb, no bomb, no bomb. You train them. Pay attention. If you 1 minute, 5 seconds, you don't look, a plane will blow up. Show them pictures of dead children. Bring family members who lost their loved ones. So they go and they really look at the screen the first day and the second day, a week, a month. After 5 years of saying no bomb, no bomb, no bomb, and all their friends finding no bomb, they don't pay attention. The same thing in the medical domain. Monitors in intensive care units, critical care units, go off all the time, 99.5% false alarm. 1 out of 200 times when the monitor makes noise, then it's something is wrong. So what does the medical staff do? They don't look, they turn it off. The monitors make the patient and the family very nervous, but the medical people ignore them because of that. What you have is clear and consistent base rate, and experts are smart. The brain notices it like F and prioritizes information, and that means you process information differently depending on your expectation. For example, with EAFS, we published a paper in Journal of Forensic Science 2012 over 50,000 comparisons, because people criticize me for small data sets. We have over 50,000. And we found that we looked, again, at casework. We didn't know they were doing an experiment. We measured how much time they spend on each item on the list, and found that as you go down the list, you spend less time. So don't say, oh, because further down the list, the items are not similar, and immediately you see that they're different. We manipulated. We took the item from the top of the list and put it in the middle and put it in the bottom. So the same item, you spend less time if it's further down the list, because you're smart, because you know that it's not going to be the most probably. And that means you're more likely to miss an ID when it's lower down the list, and you're more likely to make a false identification when it's higher on the list and you have an expectation that it may be there. So here are some solutions to the problem. After a year or two, when I gave talks, people said, OK, you're showing the problem, but you're not giving any solutions. Showing the problem and challenging is good enough, but I didn't know enough, and I don't like to go too quickly from science to solutions. But now, solutions. So I have some solutions. For example, motivate, give a reward. Offer anybody who finds a hit on AFIS below 10 or 15 gets 10,000 euros. See what happens. Force them cognitively to pay attention. Like they do airport screen people, they have a system, TIP, target image projection. Every 20 minutes, the machine X-ray projects a bomb on the X-ray. And the screeners know that, and if they don't detect it, the beeper goes off to the supervisor. So they pay attention, so you can do it with AFIS. Take a hit from time to time and put it in place 15 or 20, and tell the examiners, I'm going to do it. That's a good quality assurance measure, and if you don't find it, I know you're not paying attention. Or randomize. Take the 20, 30, 50 list that you give and randomize it. So all of these are great ideas, but they're more time-consuming. They're not practical. I don't want to be an academic coming with some academic ideas that are not practical, because if you do this, suddenly, looking at a list of 20, the time will increase when you motivate them with 10,000 euros, 10 times longer, you're going to really pay attention. So maybe it's not practical in terms of workflow. How about cut down the list? We know you don't pay attention after item 5. Give a list of 5 and randomize them, and leave some flexibility in special cases of murder, pedophiles, terrorists, or something. Then you can give a list of 50 and randomize it so they pay attention. So here are some examples. My time is very limited to some solutions. I'm going very quickly, I apologize. Usually I do it for 16 hours, so I'm cutting down to 45 minutes. But there's an excellent workshop after my talk that Reinhold Stoll is giving on context management, so you can hear an hour and a half on it. 2.5 hours, you can't get enough. Blind, so this is context management. So we're not talking about you walking blind to put a blindfold over your eyes and say, you know, make a decision. So we're not talking about being totally blind, obviously. That's not what we're talking about. But do examiners need to know everything? Even if it's totally irrelevant? Not I, who am not a forensic scientist, will decide for you. You say, this is irrelevant. I don't need to know if the suspect confessed to the crime or not. I don't need to know if the detective thinks he is guilty or not, especially when it may. I'm not saying it will, but I'm being generous. It may influence you. You can say it doesn't influence you. You're wrong, but can you say it may not? I know. It may or may not. Let's say we don't know. When we do know, why are you exposed to this information? Obviously not. It's not an insult. People get insulted. I'll show you an example from 2010. Thornton, a very good, respectable, smart forensic examiner, wrote a letter to the editor entitled, "A Rejection of Walking Blind as a Cure for Contextual Bias." And he writes, I'm citing, I reject the insinuation that we do not have the wit or intellectual capacity to deal with bias of whatever sort. It's not a matter of wit. I told you, the more intellectual you are, the more expert you are, the more wit you are, probably the more biased you are, because it's part of the mechanism, or you're susceptible to bias. So the question is, when and what should examiners be blind to? I don't have too much time. I talked about number one, things that are totally not relevant. Here's an example from a court case ended a few weeks ago. I have 4 minutes left. A Cambridge medical student is found in the street, naked. They think it's a murder, kidnap, but they figure out that she was hit by a bus 825 meters earlier, trapped under the bus, dragged for 800, it's over half a mile, if you think in mile, and the body dropped. And in England, they have CCTV, closed-circuit television. So this is an image from the bus, from the front window, claiming that the woman is seen and the driver should have seen her. Here is the woman, the head, the hand, the legs, and the white thing is the purse. So they say this is a person in court. And not only they say it's a person, they identify the woman. You're laughing, but this goes to court. The bus driver said they never saw her. All the witnesses on the bus said nobody saw anything. And it goes to court. And I have another example where the detective said the above-listed suspect is the person who pulls the trigger, make every effort to place him in the truck. To the examiner, and say, the only witness is too drunk, so it all depends on you. And these are examples. They have many when the forensic examiners are brought into by the detective, not to figure out what happened, but are brought in to give ammunition to support what the detective or the prosecutor believes is the answer. And it puts you guys in a very bad position, because nobody's asking you what you really think. You're brought in to give scientific support, because the court loves science, to that. So this is an example you should be blind to. Things that are totally irrelevant, be blind. And it gets more complicated. What do we do when it's relevant, but not really important, but can be very biasing? So you do a cost-benefit analysis. They have a paper on it, Combating Bias and Next Steps in Fighting Cognitive and Psychological Contamination. This is in Journal of Forensic Science. What if it's relevant and really important? Then show it, but as late as possible when it's needed. And there's a great paper by Crane and a whole bunch of people, including Keith Inman, who gave the plenary 2 days ago. It's called Sequential Unmasking, a means of minimizing observer effects in forensic DNA interpretation, Journal of Forensic Science, 2008. So the sequential unmasking that they've developed, great technique. And if nothing works, it's not clear one way or the other, I have solutions for that too. I don't have time to go into them in 2 minutes. Contextual management, you need to make the process blind. There are other contextual management. It does require effort. Do we need it in every case when the data is clear and there is no bias, no context, or not very problematic? I'm not saying you do. I'm saying when the cases are prone to bias, in the bias danger zone, which I can explain is a function of difficulty of the case and the biasing effects, then you use it. You can have a triage. You don't have to work stupid cognitively. Every case the same way. You can work cognitively informed and have procedures of best practices that depend on the circumstances. I have all the details in the paper. And I say, for forensic science to successfully take on issues of contextual bias, it is important that one correctly considers the risk, that measures are taken when they're needed, and appropriate and proportionally. So you need to consider the risk, and then you need to take when it's needed, and they need to be proportionate and appropriate. We don't need to get paranoid of bias and overreact. Also, we need to do research. We need to do it cognitively informed. Whether we're talking about blind verification or other processes, bias, contextual influences, working effectively with technologies, or any other aspect of forensic work, you must be guided and intimately connected to the fundamentals of human cognition. Because the human examiners, you are the instrument of analysis. Thank you very much.